Hello, this is the Definite Article for Grinder School, and today we're going to record a video focusing on bet sizing. With that in mind, I've only got one table recording because we're really going to try and focus on every single decision post-flop. Ideally, we can get through a fair few hands pre-flop, and thus manage to play a fair amount. I should clarify, we're min-raising this button because the big blind is folding far too much to steals. And yes, that's essentially it. Unfortunately, when other players are tanking, there will be some pauses, but hopefully it doesn't get in the way too much. You will note that we just folded Jack 10 suited to an undergun raise from a fish. That's because there were a couple of aggressive players who could well squeeze it, especially after the fish opened. And squeeze with a fairly wide range, in fact, mostly for value I'd expect, but regardless, that's what would happen. If this video ends up being really quite low on content, then I will simply re-record it. I won't, and rest assured that I won't have posted a video which is just lots and lots of folding and lots of raise and take it hands. I think we have to 3-bet this spot as a standard. I would be flatting it against under the gun, but a middle position range is just about wide enough that I expect them to have to defend a little bit wider, and thus 3-betting queens is good. The 4-bet's a little bit big to flat, and I'm not sure we really want a flatting range given these positions anyway. So I think we just have to shove and hope not to run into aces or kings. And obviously we are just 5-bet jamming given stack sizes. If we 5-bets say to $9, which is less than 2x the size of his 4-bets, we essentially have to call off with our entire 4-betting range. Sorry, 5-betting range, because we're getting such great odds, and we don't really care about, well, for obvious reasons, we don't have to care about post-flop playability. And most regs will know that, so they're not going to make a difference in interpretation between small 5-bets and 5-bet shoves, although possibly small 5-bets might look a bit stronger because there is a chance that a fish is going to flat a small 5-bets with essentially everything they're 4-bets. So I would keep that in mind in general. Because this guy's fairly tight, we would have been planning to flat 6s against his cutoff open. Often I think it's a bit weak to flats there, because a range for opening and cutoff is sufficiently wide that we don't have that great implied odds for flopping a set. Also, it doesn't really play too well post flop, so I think often folding is just best. In the absence of knowing this guy's capable of 4-betting light in this spot, I think a good population assumption is that he won't, and his 4-betting range is likely queens plus an ace king. So I think just folding as a standard is good, despite the fact that we've got pretty good blockers, and the fact that he's sized it's pretty small. Although I think given positions his sizing is just fine. This is close to a defend against a mid-open, and I think I'd defend at 8-5 suited, but it's just a little bit too weak to call. Also, there are rake considerations which suggest that perhaps we shouldn't be calling quite as often at 25 NL as say 500 NL. Although, to be honest, if you're watching this video, I really doubt 500 NL is going to be anything like in the near future for you. Not because the people who watch this video are going to be bad players. Far from it. I'd assume this if you're actively taking an active enough interest in improving your ability at poker to subscribe to training sites. I'd assume that you're probably already pretty good. Here we have a few options. We can see bets, hope to get value from ace high hands, flush draws, whatever, or we can check call. I think against a fish, c-betting is slightly better, and because we want to induce him to call with a wide range and we don't really care about balancing our different sizings against a fish, I think betting small is best. And there's certainly an argument for barreling against small on the turn, because not much of his range is improved. If he is calling as wide as we'd hope on the flop, then we can in fact probably get value from a lot of that again. However, I think that we don't have anything like the part of the reason we bet the flop here is sort of for protection. We managed to fold out some hands which have equity against us, and although that's, I'd suggest, an insufficient reason in itself to bet, it can turn a check-in into a bet in some cases. This river decision is quite tough. I don't expect him to play King X like this on the turn, and he can have plenty of misdraws, so we're going to call, and yeah, he shows up with ace queen, and I think that we played the hand. The hand was played fine, because I don't expect him to value bet worse than Queen X on that board, and he essentially has to have hit ace queen or queen jack to have Queen X. Against a fish, especially against a fish, in fact, this is just a check fold. We have absolutely no equity when called, and that board hits his pre-flop calling range pretty hard. So I think just folding there is probably best. It's interesting that he open limps at small blind, because I don't think I've ever seen him do that before. And I really don't think it's appropriate to use a limping strategy, blind versus blind at 25 NL. The reason being that if you're at 25 NL, you probably have bigger leaps than not having a limping strategy, blind versus blind. Secondly, the rake is a very big consideration. When you do have a limping strategy, you see more flops, and thus you'd end up paying more rake. I think it's notable that I didn't really think about flop sizing there. I think possibly a smaller bet would have been good, because our range for checking pre doesn't really contain many aces. So I don't know. I think on the river an overbet is probably best. He basically never has a flush. We shouldn't be perceived to have many 6x, and we have a lot of hands we want to bluff with. So all of these things combine to make overbetting a pretty good play. Given this is Cap's range, he probably wanted to call some of it, even though he's chopping at best. And indeed, I think it's probably best to overbet a significant portion of your range in spots like that, and you could possibly end up being a bit bluff heavy at 25 NL, because people are going to assume that the overbets are value oriented. Well, especially decent regs are going to make that assumption, and so they're going to fold probably more often than they should. However, there are still some spots in which you should use a value heavy over betting range, or I'm not really sure that there's any real points in working out in using balanced over betting ranges at any given point. The reason being that you don't really need to balance in spots where people aren't going to be paying attention, and if they are, they likely wouldn't be able to exploit you anyway. But that's a whole large topic, and it's probably not one that I really want to get into here. I folded Queen 7 off there without thinking. With a fish in a small blind, I think Queen 7 off is an open on the button. Ace 9 off is just a little bit too weak, despite being a confirmed fish there, and it in the big blind, and a possible fish in the small blind. Though it's probably the top of my folding range, and I don't think opening it there would be bad by any means. Here, we're going to 3 bets. I think there's no real reason to deviate from standard sizing, because it can't be certain how fish are going to respond specifically to different sized 3 bets. So a lot of them are going to actually going to have very elastic ranges. I found by 25-0. Here we can check because our hand is fairly weak within our range, but with 2 fish in the pots, at least this guy's probably a fish. I think betting is almost certainly superior. I think a largish bet is probably best because of the wet texture we get. Oh, that's really tough. We get called by worse often, and the withdraws. Oh, that's grim. He's repping a super strong range. I don't think he has any bluffs, and he doesn't look as fishy as I originally thought him to be. It's really tough. I think folding there is probably best, considering the flop was 4-way. It's probably a snap shove if we saw the flop heads up, and I'll have to look at that later. I think folding is probably best, but given my assumptions. Let me know what you think. Because if he ever does that with King X, I think folding is clearly awful. But given he calls a 3-bet pre-flop, and given he's 20-12 despite only playing 1 table, we're opening here because there are mostly nits and fish behind us. I don't expect him to be bluffing often. When he is bluffing, I think he probably has ace queen of spades or something, so he has a very significant amount of equity against us, and especially given we don't have a spade, I expect us to be drawing close to dead when we're behind. Because he's a fish, we can use varied c-bet sizing based on our hand strength, and I think c-betting is best here. We're close to the bottom of our range, and we can c-bet more often against fish. Plus we have the backdoor flush draw for, fun for a nice out if we're called. We can also barrel it some of the time. And also, obviously, his range doesn't hit Jack 5 two-tone very often. You'll notice that or certainly anyone who's seen my videos before will know that I spend lots of time tagging people. It's so I know without having to look them up every time roughly what sort of player type they are. I also know not to place too much faith in my tags. A lot of people I've tagged as fish are done so for quite a small reason, and so they could end up being okay often. But it's useful to have this information without having to check how many tables they're playing or every time, or having to remember that they had a 45 big blind stack at some stage, or that they were bronze star. So yeah, I'd really recommend using tags. I'm not sure quite what the right word is, but I'm not sure. I think aggressively could be an okay word for the way I'd recommend using them. Because with your HUD, once you get enough hands on somebody to know that they are actually a tag reg, you probably, the HUD pops up pretty quickly, and it's not going to impact your decision a lot anyway. Given I think at least by this stage your population assumption is that most people are regs with leaks. But still, I still use tags when I have lots of hands for pretty obvious reasons. They're still pretty useful. I don't want to specifically go through getting rid of them, and it's good to know with a quick glance when I have two nits to my left in zoom, and so it can vastly expand my opening ranges from given positions. So I think it's when you're only playing one table for whatever reason, or when you're playing few tables than normal, it's good to focus on what people seem to be doing wrong. So, for instance, if we assume that these stats are reliable, and I think the river is a pretty clear check call or check fold, depends on his bet sizing, because it's very tough to get called by worse. But if we take this guy, he's tagged as a bag reg because he's checking lots of flops, and he's pretty positionally unaware. Checking loads of flops with the initiative isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but I'm pretty confident from remembering a few hands with this guy that he's check folding far too often. So if you think about how to exploit somebody who's check folding far too often, it's pretty clear. You can just really expand your bluffing range when checks to possibly call wider in position against them as well. When they're not c betting often, you can probably incorporate donk betting ranges more often, and indeed donk bet rather than check raising lots of the time. With only one active-ish three better behind, and a fish here and a weak player here, I think opening any two data under the gun is fine. Although the one thing which made me consider it a bit is this guy's stack size. I don't want to get shoved on with this type of hand, and indeed with this donk bet, considering the amount he has behind, I don't think there's any play but fold. There isn't enough room to float really, because I expect that guy to shuffle lots of turns, and also I expect when he sizes like that, I expect him to have a lot of top pair type hands, because that's just what fish do. I'm considering starting tagging people based on how often they fold to steals rather than distinguishing between regs and nits, because that's the main thing I use the nit tag for, is deciding how to open my button range, how to change my button range and cutoff range, in fact. But that would take a long time to adjust. So obviously it's a pretty big decision. By the time you see this, if I indeed end up publishing it, this is a fold because I know this guy's pretty good, and although there's again a fish in the blinds, there's this short stack thing again. Yeah, so if I do end up in fact publishing this, this will probably be the second video you see from me. The first one was a simple 25NL Zoom commentary. Here we're c-betting because we have the 3 straight, the backdoor flush draw, and we want to have a c-betting range here. We're going to size fairly large on this turn because we expect his flop calling range to be pretty weak on this turn. We expect him to check raise a lot of his very strong hands, but there wasn't really any reason why we would adopt an abnormal sizing on the flop, given it's, although it's wettish, it's not abnormally so. Although, come to think of it, I think my flop c-bet size could have been a little bigger. These people here aren't quite tight enough to make it 8-4 suits an open from the cutoff. So if the guy in the button was a nit, I would strongly consider opening it there. Okay, so another exercise. If we assume this guy is his stats are reliable, which they clearly aren't, what he'd be doing wrong is, well, not c-betting. Following too many turn c-bets, and I think we have to float this with 2 overs and a backdoor straight draw against that sizing. And now on this turn, we don't expect him to have a very strong hand very often at all when he checks, so we can just bet. I think betting a bit smaller would probably be good because we want to his range. We expect his range to be pretty weak. And B, sorry, A, we expect his range to be pretty weak, and so we don't need to size very large to target this. And B, we want to force him to call a lot of it. And I suppose the two reasons are kind of related. I should probably have sized this a little bit smaller because of the short stack in the big blind. And this guy simply isn't 3-betting enough from the blinds to even consider calling ace off there. This okay. Let's go through another guy's leaks. This guy is obviously c-betting barreling too much if these are accurate. We're going to check this back because it's a pretty decent showdown value hand. It's nice to have some flushes in, to have some flush draws in our check back range, so we're not completely capped on a spade. And also we like to have some hands that we can happily call turns and lots of rivers with, which is essentially the same thing. The river here is tough. I'm not sure I expect him to bluff this often, but it's very close to the top of our range. We block some of his hands. I think we block more of his bluffs than his value hands actually. So I think folding's probably best, though it's close. And again, I don't think c-betting there is a big mistake. I think it just depends on your overall game plan, how you approach that. Again, against a fish, we'll be opening 7-6 off in a small blind, but obviously not now. King Jack suits to standard open. Okay, this guy's leaks. We think he's a bit too tight. If we had a decent sample, we'd assume that he was easy to float. And when this guy donks his flop, it's pretty interesting. I think most of the time we can expect a merged donking range, so I don't expect him to be donking this as a bluff very often. Whether he donks sets or not is debatable, but I think it's a pretty decent spot to float for some reason. And I think, given that we have called this flop, we have to bet this turn and probably bet most rivers, because a lot of regs are going to bet 8s, 7s, jacks, 10s on this flop when they do have a donking range. And so we expect lots of that to fold, clearly. Especially to 2 barrels. You may have noticed I'm not very good at taking notes and talking at the same time, and that might end up being a common theme throughout my videos. I think we can call this without too many qualms. We make nut flushes, and we don't expect to have too many problems with paying off when dominated, really, because we know this guy's range is strong. We expect him to often check the flop when he's not got a strong ace on ace XX, so we can pretty much just check fold ace high flops almost. Although there is certainly an argument for peeling ones. And because this guy's 3-betting often in this position, we're going to 4 bets. Because we don't really want to call ace-3 off, but we want to defend our suited aces by calling in this spot. Really. Though, in spots where we have nits and fish behind, though in spots where we do where we don't want to call ace-2 suited against a 3-bet, where we don't want to call ace-8 suited or whatever, then I would recommend 4-betting those rather than offsuit aces for 2 main reasons. One, the culture of never calling 4-bets is changing. I don't think it's anything like as frowned upon to have a 4-bet flatting range, and indeed I think in a lot of spots it's likely necessary if you're concerned about balance to have a 4-bet flatting range. So we can expect our 4-bets to be called more, thus post-flop playability and that little bit more equity is certainly useful. With an unknown and efficient in blinds, considering this guy isn't 3-betting an insane amount, we can open 7-7 suited here. And flopping the second nuts is always nice. When he donks, we're going to raise on this texture, probably fairly big, so because we expect him to have lots of draws which want to peel once anyway. And also his strong hands are obviously never folding. And again, I think we're going to raise. We want to get as much money in as possible while there are still draws to get value from. And we're going to make it a little bit smaller relative to his bet size this time, because we can get the money in on the river anyway. And also we expect some of his draws to possibly think better of it. And this is just a shove, although it sucks as his sets improved to 4 houses now. And I think, to be honest, that's a bit of a cooler for him, although he clearly played the hand terribly. So yeah, I was saying why I think it's still better to 4-bet ace-x suited hands when you're not flatting against 3-bets. And the other main reason, aside from the fact that people do tend to have some 4-bet flatting ranges now, is that it's easier to control the size of your range when you're using suited hands. Because if you think about it, with any given hand, so let's say ace-4, there's 4 combos of ace-4 suited, but 12 combos of ace-4 off. If you start choosing 4 by ace-4, then it's quite likely that you're also going to want to 4-bet some similar hands, ace-5, ace-3. When you 4-bet ace-5 through ace-3 offsuits, that's 36 combos. And although I don't think having a roughly balanced 4-betting range should be the most of your concerns at 25-0, you're going to lose money if it's very unbalanced. And it's if say you do actually 4 bets ace-6 to ace-deuce offsuit, that's 60 combos. Whereas if you 4 bets ace-6 to ace-deuce suited, that's only 20. And it's much easier to have sufficient value combos in your 4-betting range to justify 20 bluff combos than it is to justify 60. And if you plan your 4-betting range very meticulously, then outside of the other reason, it could be fine to do that with a controlled range, to make sure you have only the right amount of combos. But that's a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of work to specifically design a range off the table, given those parameters, especially given that with 12 combos of offsuit hands per hand, so to speak, you're likely going to want to, say, use half the combos of ace-5 offsuits or whatever, and that's going to be very tough to design. And yeah, it's simply not realistic that people actually do that. If you think you do that, I'd look at your database and take a look through the hands you 4-bet and see, if you assume you 4-bet every single one of those every time, what your 4-betting range actually looks like. This is close between a bet and a check. I think against somebody who looks slightly fishy but not completely, checking back is fine. Sort of contrary to the blind versus blind hand we had earlier, the significant factor here is that we're in position. We can play turns and rivers more effectively. And because we're expected to have lost for ace-x in our check-back range, if he's thinking about that, and also the fact that it makes it tougher for us to get value from worse, I don't see the point in betting the turn, and the same logic applies to the river. I think if Jeff's fine with it, I will publish this, because I think detailed discussion of hands in a live setting is quite useful. It shows you the sort of thought processes that you should probably be going through. Whereas when somebody 4-table zoom in a video, I've seen that it tends to be there's a lot of spots in which you'd like to hear why they've done what they've done, and you simply don't. We're going to flat this pre because this guy's a fish, and considering he opened on under the gun, we don't expect big blind to squeeze very often. And we're going to check raise his flop. The reason for check raising the flop, we're going to lead here because we have really great equity but no showdown value, and we're going to size fairly large because he caps his range on flop, and we expect him to have a reasonably elastic range. And this is a tough spot. Well, I don't think anything is reasonable but calling here. But it's tough to see what he's doing that with. And I think anything but check folding this river is suicide, because although I don't see what he's doing that with, I'd be very surprised if he was doing it as a bluff. Certainly more surprising if he was doing that for value. We could 3-bet this hand, but I'm not going to this time. So yeah, the reason why I was going to check raise a flop, Queen Jack suited, Queen Jack of Spades on King 9-5, I think, 2 clubs, is that we have a pretty decent hand. We have plenty of stuff that we have plenty of turn cards that we can barrel, um, and un, and unlike flush draws, which I'd be more inclined to check call, it's outside of our typical. We can't really call flop bets with it. We probably could just about. Here we're going to size fairly big because we think this fish has draws and probably fairly inelastic calling range in the spots. He has mostly draws and Queen X, and we beat all of that obviously, and we want it to call. And on the river, we expect him to have more Queen X on the turn and draws, to be honest. And well, I'm not sure about that, but we don't always expect him to bluff draws, so I think bet folding is much superior to anything else. And we're not going to size too large because there are fish who can just about fold Queen 9 here or whatever if you do bomb the river. And here we're just going to fold. I don't expect him to bluff very often at all. If he is bluffing, it's very unusual. It's going to be very rare at 25-0 in general that you see a 90 big blind bluff raise on the river, and certainly from a fish. So he could have had some 2x. To be honest, he could have slow played his sets. He could even have had pocket tens, pocket queens, possibly queen 10. Though it's possibly starting to get a bit thin for him. But yeah, it's after checking about that flop, I think we have to call the turn just in case he's deciding to take a random stab. And this sizing on the river, I don't think he's ever bluffing, nor do I think he's value betting worse. So despite the fact that we're guessing less than 4-1, I think folding is best. Okay, so just from these notes here, we expect him to enjoy playing suited cards a lot pre-flop. Completing a small blind should be fairly standard there. And also to enjoy aces. So just thinking about the distribution of his range pre-flop, we expect him to have flush draws often on flops. We expect him to hit ace high flops pretty well. And given he'd been seen to limp call a raise from the blinds with 8 deuce suited, we can probably expect that he's he actually hits low flops better than most ranges. And I think c-betting there should be fairly standard. I considered using different sizing, but I didn't really see any argument for it. Again, it's not particularly wet flop, not particularly dry flop either. He was effectively an unknown, so we just play as we would against the population. And so, for that reason, we reached the conclusion of that bet size. With a couple of calls here, we could defend king 2 suited, but apart from that, it's just a fold. And we're going to take a note on his pre-flop bet sizing because it's a little unusual. If this guy in the big blind is a fish, we can call because we're pretty happy to play suited aces against the fish's range, getting good odds even out of position. Especially considering this guy is also somewhat likely to be a fish, considering he's not got a full stack. We could consider flatting it if we thought this guy had very significant leaks post-flop, but we don't think he has. I can't see any extremely significant leaks from a quick glance at my HUD. And when you do have downtime at the tables, especially in Zoom, I would recommend quickly checking how many tables people are playing. One tablers are almost always fish. Occasionally it's some reggish guy playing on the way to work, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And 8-6 off with a miss in the big blind is a fine opener in the small blind. We should certainly be expanding our small blind range or narrowing it based on how the big blind is playing. A lot of people are absolutely terrible at playing blind versus blind at these limits. So I think that's where a lot of money can be made. Against the min raise with fish and passive players behind, I think flashing 6-5 suited is fine, despite the lack of a significant post-flop lead that we saw earlier. And although normally I'd check this back because if we bet this we likely have a very bluff-heavy range, I expect somebody who checks a flop in this position to be doing so with a weaker range than they probably should at this limit. And so we can profitably stab a lot. Because people in general aren't going to be checking top pair on the flop ever, and so clearly this caps them in lots of spots. Getting 5-1 with Sue Stasis is an easy defend. In lots of spots they're not really thinking about their own ranges, so they're not realizing they're capped. They just see they have second pair, so they're not going to call 3 barrels, whatever. And if that sounds like you, I'd suggest there are 2 ways in which you can adjust, and these should be fairly obvious. Firstly, you can start checking some of your stronger hands to give you something to cool down with. I think we're going to 4-bet small here to about 440. And I really don't see much point in betting bigger than $3. Really, we're just trying to induce him to make mistakes which are as big as possible. And now I think we just have to shove the turn. I think if we bet $2, whatever, it's just too suspicious. So yeah, if you realise that in lots of spots you are actually capping your range and folding all of us at various points in the hand, you can adjust in 2 ways. Firstly, you can start checking some strong hands. I'd suggest doing that with the bottom of your betting range for value rather than the top. Some would suggest checking top sets or whatever, and although that's fine when you crush the board, that's not because you're protecting your range. That's because you expect to get more value by taking alternative lines. Protecting your checking range is a nice side of that. So you can start checking the bottom of your value betting range. So let's say you have you open ace-10 suited on under the gun or whatever, and you're called by a reasonable-ish reg in the cut-off, and the flop's ace-high. I think the arguments for checking that spot are 2. There are 2 main arguments. Firstly, it's actually pretty tough to get called by worse. Your range after opening under the gun looks very strong, and so you're often going to get folds from second pair, pocket pairs, etc., where you'd really need calls to make a bet profitable. And here, because we expect this guy who's c-betting 75% to be checking a very weak range, which is going to barrel off on most runouts. So yeah, you check both because you expect to get rarely expect to get value from worse, and also because if you don't check, assuming you're not opening all 2 stages under the gun for whatever reason, your checking range is essentially caps at kings. Now you don't really want to call down kings on an ace-high board, and if you end up having to, you let your opponent's value bet and thus bluff very wide, which gives him a lot of expectation, and that's assuming he's doing so roughly balanced, which is a poor assumption to make. It is probably inaccurate, but the reason why we have to make that assumption is because we don't really know how an individual player is imbalanced, and I don't think there are any real population assumptions which are relevant to the situation. So you can start checking the bottom of your betting for value range. There are some who would recommend checking close to the top of it, but I've explained why I don't think that's a good idea. And secondly, you can just call down with a percentage of your range as dictated by your opponent's bet sizing, so as to make yourself unexploitable. I will probably do a video on the maths of that, but yeah, you'll notice I'm English, saying maths rather than math. But the upside is that you prevent your opponent's EV at any stage from exceeding pots. The downside is that your own EV is 0, and also, well, that's making some pretty weird assumptions which likely aren't right, but it's tough to do calculations with more accurate assumptions, and so we use rough assumptions. And secondly, if you look at what percentage of your range you'd actually have to call down, you may end up having to call down some hands which don't even beat his bluff catches, his bluffs rather. And at that stage, you certainly need to strengthen your checking range by checking some stronger hands, or betting some more bluffs. Although I think in general people see bet as a bluff too often rather than too little at this limit. I'm going to finish there. I realise that this video hasn't really been a live play session so much as discussion of various topics which have been prompted by hands and then going off on tangents, but I hope it's been useful. I will finish this round actually. I think that it will be useful to a lot of you, because based on a play of people I see at this limit, there's lots of people simply not thinking about these things, which in my mind is a leak, because there are some regs at this limit capable of exploiting these things. So, yeah, there's this vague period with not much to do, to be honest, while I wait for the big blind to come around. But yeah, I'm just going to start my end right now. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I think I've already said that. This isn't a very strong ending. And let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. I'm very open to suggestions. I'm hoping to do a fair few theory videos, which I think could well be useful to a lot of you. And I think we're just betting this turn because we have plenty of ace-x in this spot, which check back with flop, and both ranges are very weak. We could have probably bet a bit smaller, to be honest. Yeah. I don't want to make the games too much harder, but I don't think that's going to be a real issue, considering I expect him to have a lot of like 5s through 10s hands here. I think making a smallish value bet representing ace-x is fine. Obviously he's going to have ace-x at the time, but I think that we fold out enough of his range that betting that size is going to be wildly profitable. So yeah, I have been the Definite Article for Grinder School. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and leave comments below.